Hello, ChatGPT.
Hello there. Great to have you here. What's on your mind today?
Well, I thought we would talk about organic gardening. Are you ready for it?
Absolutely. I'm ready to dig into organic gardening with you.
Hmm.
With you.
Thank.
Let's do it. Just let me know what aspect of organic gardening you're curious about, and we'll get planting conversationally, at least.
Well, let's start off with what are the different types of organic gardening?
Sure thing. So, there are a few ways people approach organic gardening. One is just your traditional backyard organic gardening, where you're using natural compost, no synthetic chemicals, and maybe companion planting to keep pests away. Then you've got things like permaculture, which is more of a whole design philosophy for a sustainable garden system. And then there's stuff like biodynamic gardening, which is kind of like organic gardening with a little bit of extra cosmic or lunar influence thrown in. So there are definitely a few flavors, and we can dive into whichever one you like.
All right. Well, can you explain to me in detail about the first one?
Absolutely. Let's dive into the traditional backyard organic gardening approach. So, in a nutshell, this kind of gardening is all about working with nature rather than against it. You'd focus on building healthy soil by using things like compost, aged manure, maybe organic mulch, and you avoid synthetic fertilizers or pesticides. Instead, you might use natural pest control methods like encouraging beneficial insects or planting certain flowers that repel pests. Another big principle is crop rotation and diversity. So, you're not planting the same thing in the same spot every year and you have a nice mix of plants. Essentially, it's all about creating a little ecosystem in your garden that can more or less sustain itself and keep everything healthy and thriving naturally. So that's the heart of it. And you can definitely get into all sorts of fun details from there.
Can you give me some examples?
Of course. So, a classic example in traditional organic gardening would be using your own kitchen scraps and yard waste to make compost. That compost then enriches your soil, so you're basically recycling nutrients right back into your garden. Another example is companion planting, like growing marigolds near your tomatoes to help deter certain pests. Or you might plant basil alongside your veggies because it can improve flavor and also keep some bugs away. You might also rotate your crops each year, for instance, planting legumes in a bed one year to fix nitrogen in the soil, and then the next year planting something that needs more nitrogen in that same spot. It's all about those little practices that add up to a healthy, thriving organic garden.
All right. So, moving on from traditional, can we move on to the second type?
Absolutely. Let's step into the world of permaculture next. So, permaculture is a bit more of a holistic design philosophy. It's not just about growing plants organically, it's about creating a self sustaining system that mimics natural ecosystems. So, you're thinking about the relationships between plants, animals, the soil, water usage, and even things like how your garden fits into the broader landscape. In permaculture, you might have things like food forests where you plant in layers, tall trees, shrubs, ground covers, all working together like a mini forest ecosystem that produces food. You're also thinking about conserving resources like capturing rainwater or using grey water to irrigate, and really just making everything as efficient and sustainable as possible. So it's kind of the next level up in terms of designing your garden as a whole interconnected system, and it can be really fun and creative to get into.
I'm kind of curious about gray water. How is that organic? Doesn't that involve used soap water?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, grey water basically is gently used water from things like sinks, showers, or washing machines, just not from toilets. And you're right, it can have a bit of soap or residue in it, but in an organic or permaculture garden, people use it in a way that's still safe and eco friendly. The key is to use biodegradable, plant safe soaps and detergents so that the water doesn't have any harsh chemicals. And typically, you wouldn't pour grey water directly onto the part of the plant you eat. Instead, you might use it to irrigate ornamental plants, fruit trees, or non edible parts of the garden. It's really about water conservation, so you're reusing water in a mindful way that still fits into a organic or permaculture approach.
All right, chat, can you give me more examples of permaculture?
Absolutely. Let's dig into a couple more permaculture examples. So one neat idea is something called a herb spiral. It's basically a spiral-shaped garden bed that's designed so you can plant different herbs on different levels. The top might be a bit drier and sunnier for herbs like rosemary, while the bottom stays a bit more moist for something like mint. It's a super efficient way to use space and microclimates all in one little feature. Another common permaculture practice is creating swales, which are basically shallow trenches on contour lines that help capture rainwater and let it soak slowly into the soil. That way you reduce runoff and keep the landscape hydrated naturally. And of course, there's the idea of integrating animals like chickens or ducks to help with pest control and fertilization, turning your garden into a little ecosystem where every element has more than one function. So there are lots of creative ways to bring permaculture ideas into play.
All right, chat. Thank you. So, what about the one after permaculture?
You're very welcome. So the next one after permaculture that we touched on is biodynamic gardening. This one takes organic principles and layers in a bit of a spiritual or cosmic dimension. Basically, biodynamic gardening is like organic gardening with a focus on the rhythms of nature, the lunar calendar, and even some special preparations. For example, in biodynamic gardening, you might plant and harvest according to moon phases, believing that certain times are better for root growth or leaf growth. There are also unique biodynamic compost preparations that include things like herbs, mineral additives, and even things like fermented manure that are meant to enhance the vitality of the soil. It's definitely a little more mystical, and some people really love that aspect of it, but at its core, it's still about fostering a super healthy, vibrant garden ecosystem in harmony with nature.
Can you give me more examples?
Absolutely. So a couple more examples of biodynamic practices. One is the use of biodynamic teas or sprays. These are special herbal preparations that gardeners will brew and then spray onto plants or soil to enhance fertility and vitality. Another example is the way biodynamic gardens often have a real emphasis on creating a whole closed-loop farm organism. That might mean having animals like cows or chicken whose manure is used to fertilize the crops and then crops that feed the animals in return. And of course, there's the whole aspect of timing activities by lunar cycles. So you might plant root crops during a certain moon phase and leafy crops during another. It's definitely a unique blend of agriculture and a bit of a cosmic calendar, and it can be a really interesting way to connect with your garden in a more rhythmic, nature-centered way.
So, there are gardening methods like no-till. I find that interesting. Can you tell me more about no-till?
Absolutely. No-till gardening is a really interesting approach. Essentially, it means you're not turning over or digging the soil each season. Instead, you leave the soil structure as undisturbed as possible. The idea is that by not tilling, you're protecting the natural soil structure, encouraging earthworms and beneficial microbes, and reducing erosion. Over time, this can lead to really rich, healthy soil that's full of organic matter and holds moisture well. In a no-till garden, you'd often add organic mulch or compost on top of the soil rather than mixing it in. This layer breaks down naturally and enriches the soil from above. It also helps suppress weeds, so it's definitely a method that aligns really well with organic principles and can be a great way to garden more gently and sustainably.
Can you tell me about the importance of microbes in the soil?
Oh, absolutely. Microbes are like the unsung heroes of the soil world. They play a huge role in keeping your modern soil healthy and fertile. Basically, these tiny organisms, things like bacteria, fungi, and other microbes, break down organic matter in the soil, turning it into nutrients that plants can actually absorb. They also help create good soil structure, which means better aeration and water retention. And some microbes even form symbiotic relationships with plant roots, like mycorrhizal fungi, which help plants take up water and nutrients more efficiently. So having the thriving microbial community in your soil is super important for plant health. Is one of the reasons organic and no-till methods work so well, because you're really nurturing that underground ecosystem. So yeah, microbes are tiny but mighty for sure.
Can you tell me about some other gardening techniques?
Absolutely. There are plenty of cool gardening techniques out there. For instance, there's square foot gardening, which is a method where you divide your garden bed into small square sections, usually 1 foot by 1 foot, and plant a different crop in each square. It's really efficient for small spaces and helps you maximize your yield. Then there's lasagna gardening, which is kind of like a no-dig method where you layer organic materials, think compost, leaves, straw on top of each other, kind of like a lasagna, and let it break down into rich soil. You could also look into vertical gardening, where you grow plants upwards using trellises, wall planters, or vertical towers, which is great if you have limited ground space. And there's even something like hydroponics, where you grow plants without soil, just using nutrient-rich water. So there are lots of techniques out there depending on your space, your interests, and how you want to go.
Thank you. Hydroponics is not organic. Why did you include that?
That's a fair point. So hydroponics isn't typically considered strictly organic because you're growing without soil and often using nutrient solutions that aren't classified as organic. But I included it just as one of the various gardening techniques out there that people might be interested in, even if it's not under the organic umbrella. In the context of organic gardening, you probably lean more towards soil-based methods, but it's always fun to know there are lots of options out there. So thanks for catching that, and I'm glad you're exploring all these different techniques.
All right, so what about organic techniques like you covered no-till? What about Jadam?
Jadam, absolutely. That's a really cool organic approach. So Jadam is a kind of ultra low cost organic farming method that comes from Korea. It's all about making your own natural inputs and solutions using really simple, locally available materials. For example, you might make your own liquid fertilizers by fermenting leaf mold or plant matter. It's really kind of a do-it-yourself approach to organic farming, focused on being super sustainable and affordable. It's got a lot of emphasis on using indigenous microorganisms and natural pest control solutions, and it's definitely a really neat technique if you're interested in a very hands-on, resourceful style of organic gardening. So it's definitely a fun one to explore.
Is Jadam a Korean natural farming method?
Yes, exactly. Jadam is indeed a Korean natural farming method. It's actually considered a branch or a kind of a simpler, more accessible offshoot of Korean natural farming. The whole philosophy behind Jadam is about making natural farming techniques really low cost and easy for anyone to adopt using local, easily available materials. So yeah, it definitely comes from Korea, and it's all about that natural, sustainable, and very DIY approach to organic gardening.
All right, well, can you go into more detail about Korean natural farming?
Absolutely. So, Korean natural farming, or KNF, is a fascinating approach to organic agriculture that originated in Korea. It's all about working in harmony with nature by using indigenous microorganisms and creating natural efforts on site. One of the core ideas in KNF is to cultivate beneficial microbes from your own local environment. You do that by collecting things like leaf mold from a nearby forest and then culturing those microbes to use in your garden. The idea is that these local microbes are perfectly adapted to your environment, so they help your plants thrive. KNF also includes making your own fertilizers and pest repellents from natural ingredients like fermented plant juices, fish amino acids, or even eggshells and bones. It's a really resourceful, self-sufficient method that's very much about using what you have on hand and keeping costs low. In essence, it's another way to practice really sustainable and natural gardening, and it's got a nice philosophy of working with nature rather than against it. So if you like the DIY aspect and the idea of making your own natural inputs, KNF is definitely a great method to explore.
Are there any other methods that you can discuss that you haven't already discussed, or are we finished?
Oh, there's always another method or two in the gardening world. Just to toss out one more, you might be interested in hugel culture. It's a technique that involves building raised garden beds on top of decaying wood and other organic materials. The decomposing wood helps retain moisture and adds nutrients to the soil over time, and it's a great way to make use of old logs or branches. It's kind of like creating a little nutrient-rich mound that breaks down over time and supports your plants. But honestly, I think we've covered a pretty good range for now. There's always more out there, but you've got a solid toolkit of methods to explore. So if you ever want to dive into more, just let me know.
All right, I think I'm finished. Thank you.
You're very welcome. I'm glad we could chat about all these gardening methods. If you ever have more questions, gardening or otherwise, just pop back in. Happy gardening and have a great time with your plants.